Hello everyone and welcome to another video. So this video is going to be my weekly circle up from this past week. Let's get started. I actually didn't really do much this week in terms of any outside reading stuff. Not a lot happened. I'm going to show you some B-roll footage of me and my dad working on spraying my car, rust-proofing it for the winter. So that's what we're working on today. Yesterday I gave it a wash. You guys really don't need to see that, but it got a bath. Other than that, not much has entirely happened at all. In terms of any outside work things, normal week at work. Not really doing too much. I'm starting to get a little bit freaked out about Christmas though. Because while it's the middle of October, I don't have very much time to finish my Christmas gifts that I want to do for some people. And they're quite big Christmas gifts. And going to take me a while big. So I may work on that some this evening. And I'll show you as I get further along. I'll show you what they look like. Because they're relatively big gifts. And I've started a couple working on outside projects, but I have to plan those as well. And bear in mind, once I get everything all straightened out in terms of the outside projects and stuff, i.e. video game projects and my art projects that I like to do, we will introduce those here into those videos. So you guys will get to see what in term I'm working on. I've done a little bit of work for my TBR game, which is coming along very nicely. We may be done for next month. I highly doubt it though. So it's probably going to be introduced in January of 2023. So we're looking forward to that. But I actually did finish 2 books this week. Let's go over these in the order in which I finished them. So, the first book that I finished this month was the main book that I talked about last week. My last circle up, and that was I finished Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. Drum roll, please, for the rating it got. But I bet you can probably already guess that it did get a 5 stars. Which I honestly think is really, really amazing. As I particularly didn't think I'd give it 5 stars. When I was reading it, I did know it's definitely I thought it was definitely going to be a 4-star book, but it got a 5 stars. So I ended up giving it a 10 for characters. Absolutely love the characters. There's multiple LGBTQ plus relationships in this book, which if you know me in LGBTQ plus relationships or anything with LGBTQ plus representation, y'all know your girl's going to love it. So 10 out of 10 for characters. A 9 for atmosphere. I really enjoyed the atmosphere of this book. Very, as I was saying in the last one, very Lord of the Rings-esque. It's a very cool setting. This is technically a standalone, but Samantha Shannon is writing a prequel to this book, so you best know that And it comes out next year. So you best know that when that book comes out, you best know I will read it. Granted the size, I will read it and will probably absolutely really enjoy it. Writing, I gave it 10 for writing. I really enjoyed the writing in this part. Towards the end, there's some really hard-hitting quotes. And just the way this story is told. Like, this is an 800-page book, which could have easily been halved at around 400. It could have. But for the size of this length, I didn't feel like it dragged. There were 3 different stories happening in this book, all interconnecting. And with that, the writing flowed really nice and was woven together. I've never really read a story like that before where it had multiple stories and they all interwove and were all essentially like resolved at the end. Like, honestly, I've never seen that happen before, so I gave it a 10 for writing. I gave it a 9 for plot. I did really enjoy the plot. Plot's really hard for me to get a 10 out of 10 rating as far as plot. But if it were to probably get a 10 out of 10 rating for me, I would have had to read this in one sitting. And see if it would have kept me engaged. Because this book took a very long time for me to actually read. This book took about over a week. Whenever I did read it, it would be very easy for me to like dip out and be disengaged. So 9 for plot. Same thing, but a 9 for intrigue. I did particularly figure out what was going to happen at the end in terms of our big main story point in this book. I did figure that out, what was probably going to happen. The way it's told, I was still intrigued. And a 8 for logic. Not entirely certain how to really rate logic. I'm not entirely certain if I will rate it, but, you know, for the interwoven stories part, there were... What I think really brought it down with the logic for me was the names. They're a bit confusing. And there is a glossary and stuff at the back of the book, which I probably should have read while I was reading it and been introduced to the characters. I probably would have had a much better time with the logic. I wish they were more brought out names and would have gotten higher in the logic score. And then a 9 for enjoyment. I did really have a good time reading this book, so it got a 9.14 out of 10, which is a 5-star. It just barely scraped the 5-star mark, but it got 5 stars nonetheless. I'm very happy that I read this book. I didn't think October was going to be the month that I read Priory, the Orange Tree, but I'm very glad I read it nonetheless. And I am definitely going to be reading more of Samantha Shannon's work. The next book that I finished in the month of October was a book I actually just finished on yesterday. And the reason why this book isn't mentioned in my last weekly Circle Up is I actually didn't start it until this week when I finished Priory, the Orange Tree. So I finished Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This book is your typical, not rom-com romance, but it's your typical romance book. And what I've discovered from reading this book is I like the romance books more so of Elle Kennedy and Talia Hibbert, as opposed to Emily Henry. So I'll read you guys the blurb of this book. You know I've already read it. I'll read you guys since I'm not starting this book. So this is Nora Stevens' life is books. She's read them all, and she's not that type of heroine. Not the plucky one, not the laid-back dream girl, and especially not the sweetheart. In fact, the only people Nora is a heroine for are her clients, for whom she lands enormous deals as a cutthroat lawyer agent and her beloved sister Libby. Which is why she agrees to go to Sunshine Falls, North Carolina, for the month of August, when Libby begs for her sister's trip away, with visions of a small-town transformation for Nora, who she convinced needs to become the heroine in her own story. But instead of picnics and meadows or run-ins with a handsome country doctor or bulging forearm bartender, Nora keeps bumping into Charlie Lastra, a bookish, brooding editor from back in the city, It would be a meet cute if not for the fact that they've met many times and it's never been cute. If Nora knows she's not an ideal heroine, Charlie knows he's nobody's hero, but as they are thrown together again and again in a series of coincidences no editor worth their salt would allow, what they discover might just unravel the carefully crafted stories they've written about themselves. This is your typical rom-com romance that Hallmark would obviously make a movie of, which is particularly a good way to describe this book and the reason why it got the rating that it did. I did give it 4 stars. It's a very low 4 stars. It almost got 3. And probably what I would give it like a 3.5 for me. Is because Hallmark movies to me are movies where you can watch once and probably never read again. Like, I really honestly don't really need to overanalyze this book. And that's what I really like to do when I read books that I really enjoy, is I like to overanalyze. You don't really need to overanalyze this book. It pretty much lays out everything for you. And it's not like the story is hard or anything to understand. It's very much just your typical run-of-the-mill small town romance. I haven't read that many romances before. I've read Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. Absolutely loved it. And I've read the Him series by Serena Bowen and Now Kennedy. Love that series. So far, those are the only 2 actual, like, romance. You could count Heartstopper, but Heartstopper is different. Fine, we'll count Heartstopper as romance, because it technically is. And I've read other fantasy books with romance elements in it, and where it's brought out as more as the main story, like Lore Olympus. With this being a main romance, when I read it, I never really wanted to actually, like, sit down and read it and get engrossed. And I actually like the story. I do like reading romance, like contemporary romance, like what this is. But they're mainly, for me, the Hamburger book or the Taco Bell book. You crave it once, and you read it, you eat it, and then you don't crave it for a while. This is about this book for me. It's a feel good, but I don't think I'm gonna read again. While it was very easy for me to read, I really don't need to overanalyze it. And I can enjoy it again once. I can enjoy it only once and feel really good about it. So, a 7 for characters. Not really. There isn't a whole lot of character development in this book. It kind of does take the small town romance kind of off its heels a little bit, which I did like. But the characters aren't really more or less fleshed out. They really don't really change. I like good stories with good character development. And with this one, there really isn't any. It's somewhat there, and probably if this weren't a romance and had an epilogue and was more fantasy-based, there would be more character development. But there really isn't any. So 7 for characters. 8 for atmosphere. I do love a good small town. Very Gilmore Girls-esque, so I'm going to rate it high on the atmosphere. A 7 for writing. Again, there are some good writing and quotes and stuff in this book, but because there's no character development, the writing isn't really, like, flesh and concrete and the absolute best writing. For a romance, it technically is the best writing. Like, I would count this as really high in the romance in terms of writing department, but it's not really good romance writing. What I have also discovered for me in this book is I do like your typical romance book, but I kind of need more. It had 1 steamy scene. That's about it. A couple of other cute steamy moments, but no really, except for 1, flesh out, full cut steam moments. And those were the moments in romances that I really like. 6 for plot. Again, it's a small town romance, but there was barely any, like, plot moments. There was 1 huge plot moment, but that was essentially about it. And then one thing that happened in this book towards the end, but it wasn't really a big plot moment, and I thought it was. It was really a Debbie Downer for me in terms of, like, a big plot moment, because there's a party at the end of this book, and I thought it was going to be a more huge of a moment, because it was all strung out to be, and it didn't really turn out that way. It was kind of a Debbie Downer. 7 for intrigue. Again, it follows the plot. Really wasn't a whole lot of intrigue in this book, since with most romances, there isn't really a whole lot of intrigue anyways. And with the major plot points, there wasn't a whole lot of intrigue with them. As it's a romance, you know what's going to happen in romance books. So, and even with the plot points, you can sort of read into it what's going to happen further down the line. And then a 7 for enjoyment. About middle volume line, I did enjoy this book when I read it, but as I got reading it, I didn't really want to read it anymore. Giving it a 7.0 out of 10, which is a 4-star. It did just scrape the 4-star mark. I'm a little bit uncertain whether or not I'm going to pick up any more of Emily Henry's work, but I am glad I at least just picked up one. I have discovered a lot of what I like in romance books just by reading this book. So I am glad that I read it. And then the third book we're going to talk about is actually the book that I have just started, and that is The Sunbearer Trials by Aiden Thomas. I did take off the Just Jacket for it, as it is a hardcover book, and when I'm reading a hardcover book, I do take off the Just Jacket for it. I've barely scratched the surface with this book, but I am 40 pages in, and I am absolutely loving this. So this book is by Aiden Thomas. So Aiden Thomas wrote Cemetery Boys, which I've read last year in February. Absolutely loved it. And this, I think I'm enjoying this book more than Cemetery Boys, and that's saying something. And I gave Cemetery Boys 5 stars. So this is a 5-star prediction, and I actually didn't realize it was coming out this year, or that Aiden Thomas was writing something else. I should have followed it more, as this probably would have been a 5-star on that 5-star predictions list. But yeah, this is a 5-star prediction. And it's not like it's Priory the Orange Tree, where it's going to surprise myself in the 5-star rating. This is reading into a 5-star rating. As I have barely started, I'm going to read you guys the synopsis off of Goodreads. As each new decade begins, the sun's power must be replenished so that Sol can keep traveling along the sun, keep the evil obsidian gods at bay. 10 semidioses between the ages of 13 and 18 are selected by Sol himself as the most worthy to compete in the Sunbearer trials. The winner carries light and life to all the temples of Reino del Sol, but the loser has the greatest honor of all. They will be sacrificed to Sol, their body used to fuel the sunstones that will protect the people of Reino del Sol for the next 10 years. Teo, a 17-year-old jade semidios and the trans son of Quetzal, goddess of birds, have never worried about the trials, or rather, he's only worried for others. His best friend Nia, daughter of Tierra, the god of earth, is one of the strongest heroes of their generation, and is much too likely to be chosen this year. He also cannot but worry reluctantly and under protest for Aurelio, a powerful gold semidios, and Teo's friend turned rival, who is a shoo-in for the trials. Teo wouldn't mind taking Aurelio down a notch or two, but a 1 in 10 chance of death is a bit too close for Teo's taste. But then, for the first time in over a century, Sol chooses a semidios whose hold isn't gold. In fact, he chooses Zhao, the 13-year-old child of Malacerta, god of bad luck, and Teo. Now they must compete in 5 mysterious trials against opponents who are both more powerful and better trained for fame, glory, and their own survival. So even based on that synopsis, and with this being a duology, what has me intrigued is the ending. Because this book is based off of trials, if we have one book where it's based off of trials, I don't know where this is going to end. This may end at trial 3, and we have 2 more trials in the next book. where this may end at the end of the actual 5 trials. And then we have the second book. But then again, if Aiden Thomas ends it with 5 trials, and all 5 are ended in this book, I have no idea where the next book's going to go. So I'm very intrigued to read more. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I am 40 pages in, and I absolutely want to continue reading this book. Aiden Thomas's writing is so much. Well, I've only read one other book, but I just love writing that. Number one, a trans main character. Y'all love to see LGBTQ plus representation. I love the idea how it's about mythology. And you hear me mention the word semidios, which is semigod or demigod. And y'all know me, I love me a demigod. So yeah, I am very intrigued to read this book. So in my next weekly Circle Up, you guys may see me actually a review of me finishing this book, because I may finish this book this week. Alrighty guys, so this is my stack of the books talked about in this video for all you guys to see. Honestly, this week went fairly well in terms of my reading. I mean, I finished probably about the last 200 pages of Priory the Orange Tree. We have finished about almost 400 page romance novel about 3 days. And I've started another 400 page fantasy book, which will easily get finished next week. And yeah, we're about halfway through the month. I have only finished 3 books. We're hoping to finish 4 for this coming week, and possibly another one depending on which book the wheel gives me. As you'll see later when I do my TBR video, you'll see how that all works. But look forward to that. Anywho guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Please make sure to give it a like if you liked it, and subscribe for more bookish content from me. Down below you'll find links to all my social media stuff down below in the description bar. Feel free to check me out on there. Comment down below what you guys have been reading and getting up to this week. And remember, we are the one within the all.